giving like $5 US, I gave like $5 to like a child who I don't know if they had a home, knowing that that could feed their family for a week and literally does nothing for me. It's powerful. It's really powerful. The flavor profile of the ghee here, it's just like another level to the ghee. America just doesn't know what they're missing.
What's happening with the SaaS story in India? We make in India for the world a lot and we don't hear it as often. Is it still relevant? If you were starting a company today, are there learnings from your experience that you would like to pass on? I mean, what would you do differently? If you were trying to get to $1 million, starting from scratch, how would you go about it? What would you do? Let's say you had to do it now. You don't have access to your bank balance and your assets, and let's say you don't have the access to your network. Where would you start?
So Michael, welcome. Welcome to India. Welcome to this podcast. Just for everybody's benefit, Michael is the co-founder of Yellow Pebble, which is a state-of-the-art marketing and branding agency based out of New York, alongside your lovely wife, Isha. I've known Michael for it feels like a couple of years now, Michael, but maybe it feels a little longer actually, but perhaps a couple of years. Yeah. And you are actually, I think, a gifted marketer and salesperson. I've seen you accomplish great things and build a personal brand, and I think you've done a phenomenal job. So I'm very eager to talk to you and distill your learnings and your experiences for the audiences of this podcast. And really looking forward to this chat.
Thank you. Let's do it.
Awesome. Thank you. So yeah, I mean, I'm very excited to learn a little bit about your experiences in India, especially because it's been a long time that I spoke to anybody who came here for the first time, and I could gather. Somebody recommended this book to me called Shantaram by Gregory David Roberts. And I've heard from a lot of my friends who visited India over the years, and this was a while back, but I've heard from a lot of friends, this was a very accurate depiction of what India felt like from the perspective of somebody who was visiting it for the first time. I'm not sure if you've read the book, but
no. I would say the other thing is like it brings really interesting perspective, because like in the States, we just complain about everything. Yeah. And there's actually really, in the grand scheme of things, there's actually really nothing to complain about. Right. Because when you see real poverty here and like real disparity of wealth, like I think when there are actually no problems, we find conflict, like naturally as humans. Yeah. So coming here is like a really interesting perspective, and you see how far like the U.S. dollar to rupees, like how far that goes, and giving like $5 US, I gave like $5 to like a child who I don't know if they had a home, they were probably borderline homeless, and like knowing that that could feed their family for a week, and literally does nothing for me. Yeah. As far as like changing how I feel, like changing my monetary anything. Situation, yeah. You know, it's powerful. It's really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're touching upon one end of the spectrum. Right? Let's talk about the other end of the spectrum, because I mean, yes, there is a very real problem with poverty, but there's also some of the biggest industrialists in the world. You start to look down the list and you see there's a few Indians popping up in that list as well. Sure. So it's not just that India is the story about poverty. We're past that now. And India is also the story of growth. It's also the story of creating a lot of economic value for participants, whether you're an investor, whether you are an operator or some sort of player in the ecosystem. There's a lot of value that's being created.
Yeah, no, there's immense wealth here. I was just saying, as far as the lens of Americans, just to stop complaining. That's my message to Americans.
Right. So, Michael, I've heard from somebody that geographical arbitrage is dead, and that because we live in this hyper-connected world, all of a sudden there isn't any opportunity that isn't available all around the globe. You and I were talking over dinner yesterday, and you mentioned that there are some opportunities that you find interesting that are readily available, high quality in India, but not as readily available, and the people be willing to pay a much bigger premium to get them in the US. Can we talk about some both ways? Let's start with, what are good ideas of things that you've uncovered in your couple of days that you've been here that are so ubiquitous in India, easily available, cheap, but not as big in the US, but perhaps have the potential?
So in general, I'm super passionate about food, and like just eating the food. Everything's like so much more flavorful here. I think everything's fresh and it's more just grown and you eat it. Where in the States, it's processed, it's pesticides. And then eating the ghee, I've eaten ghee in America. The flavor profile of the ghee here, it's just like another level to the ghee. I don't, it's hard, another dimension. Yeah, I can't, it's hard to explain, but it's delicious. And I'm like, how do I bring this ghee to the States? Because I do think there's a market to it. America just doesn't know what they're missing.
Right. Right. And ghee has been long touted as a superfood, right? Just alongside, there's been a lot of people talking about fox nuts as an example. We've seen the meteoric rise in the price for fox nuts in India, perhaps driven by the international demand for it. So ghee could be one of those things that gets added to. I mean, it's a bit of, it's an interesting, as an Indian, it's an interesting observation from me because a lot of foods that we grew up eating are now getting an international recognition. And ghee was always part of my diet ever since I was a little kid. My mom used to give me ghee with whatever we were eating that day, and now it's getting that international recognition. So maybe just like yoga, it took us the international recognition to start appreciating it. Just like Ayurveda, maybe we should kind of go back to our roots and find things that are not as as prevalent in other markets, and maybe there's a market for that. And ghee is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, I think it's something that has to be like made here and shipped to the States.
Right.
I think the idea of like trying to make it in the States, it's just not there.
Right.
Because like the dairy is not the same. The cows are not eating the same. It's just, and you see it in the product. Like the butter in the States for the most part is pale. It's not, here it's like this vibrant yellow color.
Right.
And it's just it's a different product. You can't compare butter here to butter there. It's like olive oil in the States versus olive oil in Italy. It's a different product.
That's a fantastic example. Olive oil, I mean, something that all of us have now come to appreciate around the world. But I don't think that that's without extensive marketing that olive oil got there, right? First of all, you have to appreciate it, but then it has to be brought to your attention every day, and you have to start to use it on a regular basis for it to acquire that kind of a market status that olive oil has, and for ghee to try to someday replace olive oil perhaps, or even complement olive oil. It'll take a lot of marketing efforts for everybody to start inculcating it into their diets.
Yeah, for sure.
But speaking of making in India and selling in America, let's talk something that's closer to our individual expertise. What's happening with the SaaS story in India? We used to hear this term "make in India for the world" a lot, and we don't hear it as often. Is it still relevant for Indian companies? We're hearing a lot of conversation about, oh, India is a growing market. Why should I go to the US? It's harder to go to the US. I'll have to set up an office. I'll have to hire people. We have to pay Social Security. What are the considerations that somebody should be thinking about when they think of international expansion? Let's say they've got some basic credibility in India as a software company. What are the things that they should be thinking about as they even start to strategize for, let's say, expansion in the US as a software company? Is there preconditions? Are there starting points that have to be true for you to, maybe revenue numbers? Is there something that you want to touch upon?
If they're based in if they're based in India, I would say at least like a Series B level company, some revenue, some MVP. They understand their customer in India, but that communication, how they speak to the client, who they're talking to, and how they're talking to is just different in the States.
Right.
I noticed that in India, it's very like direct ROI, and in the States, it's more value driven.
Correct.
So it's a much more like longer term game.
Right.
And it's just different how you approach business in the States.
So you touched upon something that I've personally, as somebody who's lived in the US long enough, I've noticed this myself, is just the cultural aspect of how we go about evaluating business opportunities or investment opportunities. Whether I'm acquiring software or I am buying something. I'm looking at the value it'll create in my life if I'm an American, if I'm living in America. Whereas when I'm buying something in India, I'm always more cost conscious. I'm always more price sensitive and thinking about how much it's going to cost. I'm not really evaluating what that'll do to my life. And that's an important point you raise, is getting that mindset. Even if you're a Series B company, technology company in India, getting that mindset takes a little bit of unlearning and relearning.
Yeah, and I think breaking down like the rupee to dollar concept, because a lot of Indians think in rupees, and then when they come to the States,
Yeah.
it's like dollars, and that's a big shock for them.
Yeah, so your example of the $5 that you gave away to a poor child on the street works against a lot of the Indian entrepreneurs, because all of a sudden, for them to make an exciting proposition to customers, to investors, to any other stakeholders, it's a lot of dollars, right? Which translates to an even higher number of rupees, and that's always a challenge for them.
Yeah, it's definitely overwhelming.
Yeah.
That's definitely overwhelming.
So do you suggest that companies should do some level of testing the market before they're all ready to launch and deploy resources and spend a ton of money? How could somebody go about creating a test environment? Let's say I have a company and let's say I check your precondition of being Series B or higher. And I just don't know enough. I'm an Indian entrepreneur. I sort of grew up here. What are the things that I would do perhaps alongside you or independently that will allow me to qualify whether the US might be a good opportunity?
Yeah, well, especially startups, like there's usually limited capital to play. So there's a risk involved. So coming to the States, you should always test. You shouldn't just go. I wouldn't recommend going all in, because you have to think about how do you allocate capital, and if you're not allocating capital, how you're spending capital, and you have to be careful. So one way to test is like we would work with them, understand who their customer is in India, and then understand who could possibly be their customer in the States. Develop that that potential ICP in the States. Build out the messaging. How do you speak to them? Build out that sequence of messaging, whether that's in LinkedIn, other forms of media. And before that, I think that's kind of the last part. Before that, how does their brand look? How does their content look? How are the founders look on LinkedIn? Are they putting out content that resonates with the States, that resonates with that ideal ICP who they want to speak with? Because a lot of times there's this disparity between who they're trying to reach and what their website says or what their content says on LinkedIn. Like, they just don't match up.
So you raise an interesting point, because I have had the same observation that it's almost even more important to have a brand when you're selling in America versus when you're selling in India. I've seen a lot of founders in India that do not even have a LinkedIn page, or have one without a profile photograph, or do not talk about themselves at all on their website. It's just, here's what we do. They never mention their backgrounds and why they're uniquely qualified to serve the market that they're in. And it's all too common in India, but not in the US.
Yeah, I think that the thing is, like, your customer is always going to do the diligence on you. So like, if you're doing outreach and you're saying, hey, I have this product or I have this service, whatever it is, they're not going to just say, oh, I'll take a meeting. They're going to look at your handle. They're going to look at your LinkedIn page. They're going to look at your website. Do you have the credibility? Do you have case studies? Do you have the things you're talking about? And is your message concise? Is it clear in what you're offering? I get pitched a lot, and they kind of just throw up on me on LinkedIn. Yeah. They say, I do this, I do this, I do. They're offering 10 things.
Right.
We suggest like being super clear, being very direct. Who's that ICP? And just pitching that one thing to them. Here's what you need and why you need it.
That's great advice. And you guys have done really well with LinkedIn as a channel, and built out personal brands as well. Any tips for entrepreneurs who are looking to just grow on that side?
Yeah, there's a lot. I would say content consistency is super important.
Consistency in format, in frequency. What are we talking?
Format and frequency.
Both.
So you want to be clear in in who you're speaking with. So what's your agenda? And just like or post a few times a week, just some sort of consistency in how you're posting, when you're posting. And it's a long game. So slowly building traction over time, connecting with the right people, attending events, tagging people. But this happens, people want results the next day. This happens over months and months and months, and it pays off.
Yeah. I think it's especially true. Again, we're generalizing a lot today, but I mean, it's just also true because of how we've traditionally, the dhanda mindset, as we call it in India, we're traditionally evaluating on the transactional level a lot of things in our day-to-day business affairs in India. You're not always taking a long-term view and saying, all right, if I invest $20,000 or $200,000 to go for this big event, even though I might not get 500 leads from it, which would then justify the ROI, but it's actually building my brand. It's going that one step further and building my brand, and I'll be seen. And maybe 5 events down the line, I would have got 5,000 leads either through the event or directly through my website. But there's some correlation between what I'm doing in that event, and it's not always. I think part of the challenge is it's not as like you look at something like ROAS, which is return on ad spend. And it's very clearly people can see I'm spending this much on Facebook, this is what I'm getting, or I'm spending this much on LinkedIn, and this is the kind of MQLs I'm getting, or marketing qualified leads I'm getting. It's not that straightforward with branding.
Yeah,
right?
that's strictly a numbers optimization, like just tweaking, and that's strictly. But this is more just a longer term play, and becoming like a thought leader in the space. So you want whoever's viewing your profile, you're like, oh, that this person knows this super niche thing. And usually I like to say like the nicher the better.
Yes.
Because that's who your customer is going to resonate with. So as detailed as you can get, I would say that's the most likely and highest rate for possible conversion.
Got it. And this is true not just of people, it's true of businesses. The more tight of a niche you can carve for your target customer, the easier it is to get them, and the more relatability you will have when you do get a chance to speak to them, because you would have been playing in their space for a while then.
Yeah, well, I mean, we see this on websites. So we go on, we work with a lot of B2B tech. Mm-hmm. We'll go on their website and they just speak so general or way too technical. Mm-hmm. And they're not really talking to anyone. It's just, who are they trying to reach? It's just an engineer wrote the copy and they're not resonating with their customer. And that's like the general theme of what we see kind of over and over again.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of this so what rule that I was taught early in my sales career is whenever you say something, ask yourself from the perspective of the listener or the audience or the buyer, whoever it might be, so what? How does that help me? What does that do for my business?
Yeah.
And you gotta, I think the number one advice that I got early in my career is you gotta start thinking like your customer.
Yeah.
And if you were somebody were to wave a magic wand and suddenly in their shoes, would you go ahead and say yes to their software or to their offering? And if yes, what are you looking to get from it? How much are you looking to spend and what would you get at the end of the day? And if more people just did that simple exercise where they just put themselves in the shoes of the buyer and ask the questions that they would sort of want to know and evaluate with that mindset, they would be a lot more successful if they just did that one simple thing.
Yeah, would you buy your own product or service?
Would you buy your own product? Yeah. And it's easy for somebody to say, yeah, of course.
Well,
there's
a bias.
In the world.
Yeah.
There's a bias. Yeah. Try to get rid of that bias and think about it from an external perspective. If you weren't benefiting from the sale, how would you buy it as a buyer? Not as a seller,
Yeah, I think to really put yourself in your potential customer's shoes, you start to change the narrative and the value prop in what you're pitching.
Right.
And you kind of almost reverse engineer like what's really breaking it down of like what's really important. Mm. Because most of the things we're pitching, it's like they don't care about all these things. Mm. They're mostly buying your product for this one or service for this one thing. Mm. And you're pitching them all these other things and it's getting diluted. So find that one thing and sell them on that one thing.
Yeah, but I'll tell you where this comes from. And as an engineer myself, and a lot of my fellow entrepreneurs are engineers, they come from this playing the probability game, right? So it's not that they want to pitch you on everything. They just want to maximize the probability of you saying yes. I mean, now I know that's not the right approach, because the more specific I can get in my pitch, the more it'll appeal to you. And if I
Right.
say I solve everything, I really don't solve anything.
Right.
But I think that's where people are coming from, is when they're giving you a long list of things that I can do, they're really telling you that, hey, pick anything. I'll do it for you. Right? Can you just pick anything? I'm so desperate to work with you. Just pick anything, you know? But that's just not the right strategy.
Yeah, I think what you could do is like find the main issue, and then as you're working with them, you can, well, we also do this. As you see the holes, as you see the holes, you can kind of
No,
fill
there's
that
always
in.
opportunities to land and expand, but you have to get a very precise pitch going in to say,
Right.
this is exactly where I would create value for you. Do you think that we're at this age with Gen AI and all the other AI tools that are coming in, where we could almost automatically craft starting points of subjective pitches, specific pitches for target markets? So, for
Yeah.
example, you are a B2B tech company, you would have a different pitch. Somebody's a CPG company, they would have a different pitch. They would go through their reports, perhaps if they're a public company, and then kind of make a custom drafted pitch for them. Do you think Gen AI could do things like that today?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing that now.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, we're doing that now. So like, I could say internally for Yellow Pebble, I do a lot of like LinkedIn outreach. I would say, like, let's say we're reaching out to 10 different types of ICPs. We have different messaging for each of those people. And I'm giving like Gen AI a general messaging on like what I'm trying to accomplish here. And then they create a more direct, impactful message. And I'm giving them like parameters, like make this super condensed, to the point, impactful, and a clear ask.
But you're not doing this individually on every opportunity. You're just training it to do it automatically every time there's an opportunity that comes up in your Salesforce or your CRM.
So I'm basically doing that off like 10 different ICPs that we have.
Got it.
So it could be CXO of, I'll even break it down further, like a CTO of a digital transformation company that's 5,000 employees in the States. That message is going to be different than if we're working with a B2B tech company that just raised Series B funding. That's a SaaS company. They have different needs, they have different wants. And then I always adjust the message. So we have analytics on who's engaging and what. Based on that analytics, we're slightly tweaking the message and constantly optimizing it.
I would be super curious to learn a little bit more about your tech stack as you're doing that, because I think you're one of the you're one of the best people at this initial outreach. I think that's one of the sort of great skills that you have. Would you be willing to tell us a little bit more on what kind of tools are you using to do that? You talked about automation, analytics.
So we tend to favor LinkedIn, like we were saying before, because the customer can do their due diligence, look at our profiles, look at my profile, and seeing that I'm walking the walk, and I have the credibility. A lot of people push like cold email and stuff. The problem with that is there's nothing behind that email. It's harder to like look who you are from there.
Can I interrupt that for a second?
Yeah,
I
go
want to
ahead.
understand something. So if I am a brand, and like you said, startups have limited budgets and limited time and resources, would you recommend that I only did LinkedIn really well? Or would you recommend that I do multifaceted, where I do LinkedIn, I do email, I get a Facebook page, I get Instagram? And obviously it depends. I think the answer is it depends. But generally speaking, if I'm a B2B tech company and I only have X amount of dollars and X amount of time in the day and X amount of resources, would you say that I first master LinkedIn before going on to other things?
I'm definitely biased, but I would say for B2B technology companies, I would highly recommend to favor LinkedIn over anything else by far. Internally, that's how we that's how we got most of our initial success. Deals, 95% of our deals before referrals, any of that, just starting off, was just through LinkedIn outreach, understanding the customer, building that message. That was a success that we got, and then we were able to replicate that and implement that for our customers.
Got it. Sorry, I interrupted you. So you were telling us a little bit about the tech stack that you use for LinkedIn itself.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a few tools. So you can use like standard ChatGPT for optimizing message. I think a lot of ChatGPT, or any of them, Gemini, whatever your flavor is, I just think it's asking the right questions. Ask the right questions, you get the right output. So I use ChatGPT a lot just for like creating impactful condensed messages. It's 3 sentences max, and then build that sequence of messages.
Are you giving it a starting point? Bullet points?
I am. So okay. I'm giving it maybe a longer paragraph, and I'm saying, here's our customer, here's what we're trying to accomplish, here's our offering. Build an impactful message from this. Make it condensed to the point, and then based on that output, I'm further critiquing it.
Got it. And presumably, if somebody had like a spreadsheet of their, let's say, customers, you could, in theory at least, build a individualized message for each prospect, each lead, just tweaked slightly to their specific use case, to their brands, perhaps, to their customer profiles. And so you could actually go down to the individual lead level, even though you wouldn't want to spend that time manually crafting a message.
I was doing that initially, and it just, you get your like whole day doing it. So now we have SDRs, and I basically like will give them each a list of like 500 leads, and I'll give them the messaging. So I know this messaging works, so they're manually doing it. Before we had like LinkedIn automation. Now, honestly, LinkedIn's just cracking down on automation. So on my profile, I was reaching out to like 200 profiles per week with the automated messaging. But now LinkedIn's picking up on it. So I don't want my chance of my profile being banned. So we have like SDRs that kind of do that manual work for us.
Have you experimented with AI SDRs yet?
Not so much. No. So these are just like
human SDRs.
Human SDRs. So we're just giving them everything, and they're just doing it at scale, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of, going back to our topic of adapting to the American audience. When I've been a sales guy in the US, and my initial struggle was just keeping up with American sports terminology. Throw a Hail Mary. And my first few days in America, I didn't know what that meant, right? Or, there's so many of these. And I think that's a small aspect of it, is cultural lingo, and perhaps your customers will be happy to repeat themselves in language you understand. But the point here is that there is significant cultural...
it's the same for me. Like, the head nod thing's throwing me off in India. Because I think they're saying no, but then Isha's telling me they really mean yes. And I'm still learning that.
I get that. Yeah. And I mean, it's not just the head nod. Many times we say no, and we actually mean yes, even without the head nod. Sometimes we'll say no, but we're like, yeah, please ask me again, and I'll say yes. I come from the city of Lucknow, and it's considered to be, we say the city of adab, and adab is just a fancy way of saying there's a lot of respect. There's a lot of there's a way we're supposed to maintain ourselves, right? And part of that adab is, you ask me for the first time, I always say no. But I expect you to ask again, and then I say yes. Because
why? Where does that come from? Like, why? What's the?
It's just a sign of saying, of showing respect, I guess. And it's a cultural thing. I don't know if there's rationality to it.
Okay.
It's just the way how things have evolved in my part of the part of the world that I was born and raised in. If you ask me if I would like to have a cup of tea, if I'm visiting your home, my first response would be, no, don't bother, even though I really want that tea, So it's a very Lucknowi thing. And perhaps to some extent it's an Indian thing as well, is I'll first say no, but I'll want you to ask again, and then I'll say yes.
Wherever we go here, everyone just chai.
Yeah.
New York, I'm from New York. Everyone's just so direct.
Yeah.
Most New Yorkers are. They mean what they say, and it's just very like, here's what it is, and get to the point.
Yeah.
But it's interesting traveling, because you pick up on these cultural nuances, and you still learn. You know, I'm still. It's not like I've been in India. Well, I've been here for like 5 days now.
Yeah.
So it's still everything's all new.
And I mean, not just that. There's subcultures within the U.S. I mean, there's a New York culture, there's a Boston culture, there's a San Francisco culture, there's a Chicago culture, right? And you cannot possibly master that unless you've been living in it for a bit, right? So I've noticed that when I go from New York to San Francisco, it's a very different way of operating, right?
Yeah, I would say in the Bay Area, me and you should go to the Bay Area a good amount. Like, it's easier for us to get meetings with VCs, or it's almost like they want to help.
Yeah.
I live in New York, and that's one of the hardest places for us to get meetings. It's like,
right,
because as a New Yorker, the first thing is like, what do you want from me?
Yeah.
So you have to but then once you're in, they really like treat you like family. But it's like getting in is, for a New Yorker, they have a barrier. They have everyone's like protected. So,
and I mean, I think I try to put them in terms that perhaps entrepreneurs will understand. The top of the funnel is harder in New York. The bottom of the funnel perhaps might be easier in some ways. Whereas in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, getting just the initial interest might be a little bit easier. So the top of the funnel is a little bit easier. So I guess the advice to entrepreneurs that are trying to make their first sale in America would be perhaps start on the West Coast.
Yeah, I also think it's like where, like what industry you're going for. New York has a lot of fintech.
Yeah.
There's tends to be a lot more VCs in the Bay Area, a lot more just general startups in general in the Bay Area. Mm-hmm. Boston has a lot more biotech and pharma type companies. So it really depends, like, what you're doing.
So if you were starting a company today, are there learnings from your experience that you would like to pass on? I mean, what would you do differently if you were trying to get to $1 million, starting from scratch? How would you go about it? What would you do? Let's say you had to do it now. You don't have access to your bank balance and your assets, and let's say you don't have the access to your network. Where would you start?
So there's a lot. So I was talking about this earlier, but there's a lot of like just this AI push right now. And I'm not necessarily like the most technical person. Like, I almost want to go back to like brick and mortar and like just doing tangible physical things.
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily think about like what's the end result of how much money I can make. I obviously want to make money, but I also want to enjoy the process. So yesterday when we went out to dinner, I was talking about like India really needs great cheese. They really need great mozzarella. I don't know if there's a demand for it or not, but like I notice here that there's not like high quality cheese, but there's high quality dairy. So like they have the infrastructure and like everything's in place. They just need someone to make it.
Yeah, well, I mean, we do have, technically, paneer is also cheese.
No, I know paneer is cheese.
So I think what you're talking about is what is considered to be high quality international cheese, right? Which I do 100% agree with. I think, I honestly believe that as somebody who's traveled the world on pizza, I didn't think that we had very good pizza until very recently. You know, I now have a few brands that I like going out to have pizza in Mumbai. But until a couple of years ago, I didn't think that there was an authentic Neapolitan style pizza or Romano style pizza or, even New York style, Chicago deep dish. There just wasn't. I mean, the standard Domino's that everybody was being given was this just Domino's pizza, which is, you and I both know that's not pizza. Anybody can slap on some cheese and some tomato sauce on a piece of bread and call that pizza, but that is not pizza.
Yeah, the Domino's is interesting because, like,
and I don't want to bash up Domino's. I mean,
no, I can't all day. I don't like fast food chains. It's amazing in a place like New York how Domino's like still is open.
Yeah.
But so to me, it's like it's obvious that there's still a market and a demand for it.
Right.
But if Domino's can survive in New York, it could probably survive anywhere. I mean, that's going on a tangent, but it just.
No, but I mean, going back to your comment about cheese, right? Yes, we do need good quality cheese, and not just cheese. I mean, I'll tell you something that I am always looking for. I love Brussels sprouts, and I just cannot get enough Brussels sprouts in India. I mean, I'll get it. I'll get it from time to time, But the overall variety of vegetables that I used to have access to in America was multiples higher than I have in India, which to me is interesting because we're a country of 1.4 billion people, if not more. And so technically there's a market to support it. And if there's enough of us, even in just urban cities, even in the top 1% is asking for it, there's enough of a market for it.
Yeah, but I would say America's problem is we have all the foods, it just might not be the highest quality because we're importing it from everywhere. So maybe the reason, like most of India's food is from India. So
Why should that matter?
it affects the quality.
So you're saying the supply chain, the time taken from the time it's produced, from the time it's harvested to the time it gets to your dinner table is the factor here.
Partially, the other part, like if you're growing it in America and then shipping it to India, let's just put cost aside, you're likely going to have pesticides and other things that you're probably not getting here in India, and most people probably wouldn't want that, I'm assuming.
So my perspective is slightly different on this. America has good regulation and good enforcement. So the FDA, for example, the Food and Drug Authority, will put in some basic checks on the amount of pesticides. In India, the enforcement of these things is extremely poor, right?
Interesting, okay.
So while you might be correct, 90% of the time we might have organically produced higher quality vegetables, but the 10% that you're not correct, the cost is extremely high. So if you have an overdose of pesticide in a vegetable, you have, and you are, let's say, the person harvesting it, is very little chance that it'll be caught out in the system. So even though most of the times the vegetable might be fresher, but in the one time that it's not, the downside might be much, much greater than in India in that sense. So I think that there's that component of it as well. But also I was talking about, we talk about the world getting smaller, right? So if my avocados are coming from Mexico or from Peru, why should it matter? Other than economic reasons, other than the fact that I would want to have them locally produced, why should it matter where they're coming from? As long as they're economically
I don't
viable.
think it should. I think, this is a separate conversation. I just think in general, America's food, there's a huge issue with it.
Yeah.
So like the idea of like growing it in America and shipping it somewhere else, to me, that doesn't necessarily make sense. But I understand where you're coming from. I just think America needs to fix their food problem. That's a whole nother conversation.
So Michael, if you were giving advice to your 20-year-old self or 25-year-old self, you can define whatever stage you want to go back. What advice would you give? How would you distill whatever you've learned in your years of experience?
Yeah, I would say I'm still learning a lot, but I would say, I would say try more stuff early on, see what you like, and just go all in. And stop trying to listen to
the pundits,
either family members or friends, or just do what you want to do and live your life.
That seems like good advice. Do what you want to do and live your life. Well, I guess what you're saying, jokes apart, what you're saying is take a lot of risks early on, because the cost of the risk increases as you mature, and take a lot of risks, learn from them, and just go deeper and deeper into things that you've found to be more pertinent to your gender direction in life. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think early on you could afford to take a lot of risk, and that's when you should take it. And I think there's people in your circle that they don't mean any harm, but they're kind of projecting your life on how it should be, and they're giving you advice based on their own experience, and that's not necessarily right for you. So just be present and have a good time.
Yeah.
Don't overthink. Just live life.
Yeah.
I think I just overanalyze too much and like
Yeah, I think we have
stuck,
a type. I do overanalyze a lot of things as well. I feel like this is the one feedback I try to keep giving myself, is I think too much about things. I've gotten better at it, but I still analyze. It's a running joke in my family. We take 30 minutes to place an order. on a meal online, because we're optimizing what everybody wants to have, and we're optimizing where we want to get it and the best meal, but it doesn't really matter. It's just one meal. In the context of your life, it's one meal. So it's really not that grand in significance. But we tend to do it anyway. We spend 35 minutes debating which restaurants we're ordering from, what we're ordering from that menu, and which one each of us will get. And I think this comes with the whole engineering mindset, doesn't it? We're always trying to solve a problem even when there isn't one.
So I think for me in particular, like, I didn't necessarily do well in school. I wasn't top of my class. I mean, I went to good schools.
You went to Columbia, so I would say that's better than a good school.
Yeah, but I wasn't necessarily like top of my class. I wasn't like, I was more just always just like, how do I beat the system? I was more just like trying not to follow the crowd, and like, how can I skip the line in the most like respectful way? Not like cheat the system, but like, everyone's going here. Why can't I try this path? No one's even considering this.
But I think that's what perhaps is the most important skill when you think about entrepreneurship. And I think the people I know that have gone on to build huge companies, some of my batchmates, the folks that I went to school with, have built huge public listed companies now. And none of them were, as we call them, 10-pointers. None of them were like top of their class. All of them had this thing in common where they're questioning the status quo at all times, and they're saying, can I do it better? Can I do it differently? The rules are all made up by people that are no smarter than you, as Steve Jobs famously said.
Yeah, my parents, maybe, I don't know if they would admit it now, but I don't think they liked me. My brother and sister were just rule followers. They got very good grades. They didn't question. I questioned everything. Why is it done this way? Why do we have to go this way? Why can't we try this?
But do you think curiosity is something that can be I mean, you were naturally more curious, is what I'm hearing.
I just ask questions and like, why do we have to do this?
But do you think if I'm not naturally more curious, I could inculcate curiosity? Could I teach?
Maybe. I mean, for me, I think it was inherent. I don't know why. I just didn't understand like this. To me, these things didn't make sense. Why are we doing it this way? Why can't we try it this way? And I think early on, I would just do like obscure things that like, even if they didn't like result in an ROI or anything, for me it was like a fun thing to do. And I have some crazy stories, and we can go into some of them. And they're just like things that like most people say this makes no sense, like on a time perspective or like why you're doing these things. But for me, it's like, here's how I skipped the line, and here's like, if 1,000 people are applying to this one job, how do I just get faced with the person that's going to be interviewing me? How do I stand out or that kind of stuff?
Give us an example of a crazy story.
Well, I also have a company, Medical Mics. It's a CBD company. Early on, like I wanted to get into cannabis. I'm like, how do I get in? I tried working for companies, and especially in New York, it's always like kind of shady, like what's going on. It's like, is it a real company? Like, it's not really, it's a gray area. Is it legal? So there was this college in Maryland that was offering a cannabis course maybe like 10 years ago. It was the first, it might have been the first cannabis, besides California, in the East Coast, the first cannabis course at a college.
Okay.
So I called the professor. I'm like, I'm based in New York. Can I just take it online? Or he goes, no, you have to be in person. And so from where I was living to the campus was like a 5-6 hour drive.
Right.
So I was like, I'm just going to drive to Maryland once a week and drive back.
And did you?
Yeah, I did it for a semester.
Oh, wow.
So I drove from my house to take 5 hours to take an hour and a half class, and I drove home. So I would drive 11, 12 hours, and I would get home at like 2 a.m. And I did that for 3 or 4 months.
But that is drive. Do you think the drive is fueled by curiosity?
Yeah, I think it's entangled. I think it's both. Because I was definitely curious, and I was passionate about like, I mean, that's a different thing, but it's like I was passionate. It's derived from like cannabis, but it's more like alternative medicine. Like, how do you, besides conventional, whether pain medication or any, like, that's how I initially got into cannabis. Like this could be a healer.
Yeah, you mentioned the story about a pet.
My dog suffered from arthritis. These conventional like arthritic medications are very harsh on her stomach.
Yeah.
It could lead to like ulcers and bleeding. And CBD helped. It was remarkable, and she lived a long time because of CBD. So that's when I started to pursue that. But I started to do just extreme things that I think most people wouldn't do, and that's how I got into the space.
Is there a story from marketing that you did different from how the rest of the world approaches it? Because I mean, again, keep coming back to what you're really good at.
Yeah. So how did I get into marketing? How do we grow Yellow Pebble? We leveraged Bits Pilani. So like Isha went to Bits. Isha is my wife. We're also co-founders. I probably should have said that in the beginning. But no one was really giving us a chance in the start because we didn't really have case studies or anything to show for it. We're like, oh, we do these things.
So you leaned on the Bits Pilani community?
We leaned on and this was through trial and error, but we leaned on the Bits community that were like CXOs in the States. We tried it first in India, but the spends didn't make sense because like our overhead in the States, like it just didn't work. So our first initial wave of customers were Bits Pilani, and you're also Bits.
Yep, guilty as charged.
and they were the ones that gave us the first chance. Yeah. And so I'm forever grateful for Bits Pilani.
It's a fantastic community. I have been so honored and so lucky to be part of this community. It's always something that I can go back to, and I love that about the Bits community is we have a dozen WhatsApp groups that we're all on, and we're always messaging each other for like the tiniest of things or the biggest of things, and it feels great to be a part of that. And I think in some ways it's the perfect size, right? So we have a few campuses around the world, but it's not so diluted to the point that we don't relate with each other, and but it's also not so tiny that we're inconsequential to the point that you mentioned you could find an sizable number of CXOs in America. So it's not too tiny, it's not too big, it's just the right size. And I think that's a big part of why the Bits community has been so powerful and so
and
useful.
Then once I noticed it started to work, then my personality, I'm going all in on this. So I pretty much, and Isha is not like, but under her name, I pretty much message every single Bitsian. So if
why not Colombia? I'm curious.
No, I did Colombia as well.
Was it not the same result?
Not the same result.
And is that an Indian American thing in your opinion?
I think there's more of a camaraderie. There's more. Hey, I don't know. I'm just making assumptions. I didn't go there.
No,
but
yeah. I mean, let's because I think that there's an element of being immigrants in a different country. So you kind of go back to
they
your
want
own
to help.
kind. So you would help because they've been through that experience. So it's a shared experience of kinds. And that's what brings people together. And we were talking about this over dinner yesterday as well, is, ultimately you're optimizing for something. If you're not optimizing for money, you're optimizing for happiness. And if it's not happiness, maybe it's peace. And if it's not peace, it's community. And I think, there's been several studies that have shown that the highest correlation for happiness actually happens to be community, right? So the more community, the more of a participant you are in your communities, the more happiness that tends to drive. After a point, money doesn't really do much. I mean, once we cross that threshold, $5 million versus $10 million,
doesn't matter.
It doesn't really change things that dramatically. But going for 5 events or birthdays or kids parties, whatever it is that your community you believe in and you feel passionately about, that community aspect really drives happiness.
Yeah, I think, and that community is everything. And what I notice is like when we went on a call with a Bitsy, and for the most part, we don't have to like oversell. They're already convinced for the most part. We're just showing them our capabilities and does it align with what they need. And it's a much smoother sale. So I mean, that's how we got.
But that's an important lesson. I mean, we're not talking specifically about Bits. If you are Bits, by all means, leverage that. Hit us up, in fact, if you are Bits and you're looking for some help. But I think the point is go back to people that understand you, people that relate to you, people that you have shared experiences with.
Exactly.
Start there. You have a higher probability of success. If you're building something from scratch, maybe start there rather than trying to go out in the world and sell. I'm sure there's somebody who has a shared experiences, or some sort of shared experience with you, or shares something in common. Maybe you have the same hobbies. Maybe reach out to people who have the same passions or hobbies or things like that, and maybe start there. There's some merit in that.
Yeah. I mean, so Bits is one example, but like if you're just doing a startup, again, like you said, it's finding that common connection that's going to build way past business. That it could be, I'm into watches, I'm into baseball, and that's another thing like that. Shifting a little, me and Isha for this year are trying to do much more in-person meetings.
Yeah,
because you build that connection past like, what do you do? When we go on Zoom calls, it's like, here's the pitch, and then do they do it? And then there's no like connection there. When we're meeting someone in person, I'm understanding like more about them.
Yeah.
What kind of foods they like, where do they live, how do they live, what do they like beyond, what's their life outside of business? And I think that's super important for just connecting overall. And again, that sense of community.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an element of just standing out. The good old-fashioned standing out, right? Is when everybody is disconnected, you try to be the one that's there in person, right? When everybody is reaching out over Zoom calls and team calls and phone calls, you try to beat somebody and shake their hand and break bread with them, right? And
when everyone's talking AI, I just want to make mozzarella.
Yeah. Or maybe use AI to make mozzarella.
Maybe a robot will make the mozzarella and feed the world.
No, but I think everybody's talking about AI. I mean, I don't think that AI is actually as pervasive as people want you to believe, right? I think, I mean, you take the example of, we were talking about UPI, which is Unified Payment Interface, which is the QR thing that you scan in case somebody's not lived in India. That is so ubiquitous in India. You can get, no matter where you are, you can get 50 rupee transactions done. You can get 50,000 rupee transactions done. It's just, I've seen people do it for 2 rupees and 3 rupees, which is, just tiny amounts. It is all sorts of transactions happening on that. So that is genuinely, digital payments is genuinely something that you can see around you. But do you see as much AI? I mean, people talk about AI agents doing this and that, and how much really are big organizations, how much is mainstream corporate using AI in reality versus just talking about it?
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem. I think there's a lot of saturation. There's obviously so much use cases for AI, and it's evolving every single day.
Sure.
But because everyone's talking about it, it's hard to weed through the bullshit.
Yeah. We can swear.
Are we
that's
allowed
fine.
to curse?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. So because everyone's talking about it, it's like it's hard to know what's of value. It's like the .com boom.
Yeah.
Everyone had a website, and then everything crashed. And then, but there were the companies that stayed. Those are the ones that are here today.
Well, you're absolutely right. I've drawn this in a speech that I made in Amsterdam, and I talked about this parallel about how the industrial revolution down to computer adoption, down to internet adoption, mobile adoption. You can almost see the similar sort of signs with AI, where each of this is a revolutionary enough concept that it's changing the face of the industry. It's changing the face of every single industry. But how it gets adopted, there's a hype cycle at the start, and then there's an adoption curve. And then initially we're in the AI hype cycle. Maybe we're towards the end of the AI hype cycle, where now we got to start to see the real adoption start to kick in, right?
Yeah,
it happens with computers. I mean, sometimes I've seen those hilarious quotes about people saying, "Oh, it's a calculator. It's just a big calculator, and is it really going to replace accountants?" And it did not replace accountants. They just made them more efficient. So it was a toolkit. And every single one of these revolutions has been in a toolkit. Is it gonna replace X? Is it gonna replace me in my job as X? Probably it's not gonna replace you, but it's gonna be a toolkit available to you that you should learn to use. Otherwise, you would become obsolete very quickly.
Yeah, I think the challenge with a lot of these hype cycles, it creates crazy valuations for startups.
Yeah.
So the expectation.
Well, you say challenge.
Yeah.
Crazy valuations from their perspective isn't challenge, but it is challenge from the other.
Long term it is, because
it sets the expectations wrong.
Yeah, because they're going to have to eventually have the revenue to support these valuations. And they need to show that, whether it's 6 months from now, 12 months, eventually they need to show something. So we'll see how the market plays out. It will definitely be interesting.
Do you want to take on any bets, any predictions for AI in the next 1-2 years, maybe?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of companies that go under, because I think there's a lot of companies now that are way overvalued. But I think the ones that stay will be the ones that are going to 10, 100, 1,000x.
That's not much of a bet. I cannot take a short against companies. There's no ways of doing long-term shorts unless I keep rolling my puts. But if I had to take a bet, what are the kind of companies do you think that will make it big in AI? Is it the status quo? Is it the same incumbents like Microsoft and Google and Amazon? And
No, it's the ones that are differentiating themselves, and how are they unique in the marketplace, and then obviously marketing plays a role. Are they standing out, or are customers starting to adopt, and are they growing? And how easily are they to be replicated? Are they defensible? Like all these things matter. I think a lot of people, again, the hype cycle, some founders get delusional. Oh, I just raised 10 million, I raised 20 million, I raised 50 million.
doesn't do much. To what end?
But what's your revenue? What's your projection of revenue? Like, in the end of the day, a business should be making money.
Money. Yep.
And if you're focused on just raising money over and over again, I think we're losing the point of what this is. So,
fair enough. All right. As we start to land this plane, is there anything else you'd like for us to talk about?
No, I think we covered a lot, from cheese to AI. So
yeah. And everything in between.
Yeah, and everything in between, and hydroponics. So.
Yeah. Well, it's always a pleasure talking to you, and I'm sure we'll continue the conversation off the microphone as well.
Of course.
And thank you so much.
Thank you
for your time. Thanks a bunch.
Great.
Thank you.